Hello, everyone. It's a game day edition of Sports Insider. I'm Dan Labbe, joined as always by Chris Fedor, and we are going to talk Browns-Bengals with our Browns beat reporter Mary Kay Cabot. We'll also talk Cavaliers and ripped sleeves and everything else with Joe Vardon. And then, of course, the Indians now in full off-season mode. We will talk about that. We'll talk about the World Series with Paul Hoynes, and Bud Shaw will join us later. But first, let's get right to it. Browns-Bengals tonight in Cincinnati. We're joined by our Browns beat reporter Mary Kay Cabot. Mary Kay, how are you?
I'm doing great, guys. How you doing?
Doing okay. Johnny Manziel is going to get his second start of the season tonight. What's a reasonable expectation for Johnny, starting on a short week, starting against an undefeated team?
Well, the two things that he's really got to do is look for Gary Barnidge, who always seems to get open no matter what, and he's got to look for Travis Benjamin. He seems to have some really good chemistry with Travis, and I think there might be some opportunities to hit some big plays to those guys. I think the Bengals are vulnerable to the big play. But then once they get down into the red zone, they tighten things up down there. But you can almost always find Gary open. If he's not open, all he has to do is jump up over somebody to get open. So those are the key things that Johnny's going to have to do. And then also, he's going to have to look for Duke Johnson. They might not be able to run the ball. They haven't been able to. But Duke, can get out. He can operate out of the slot. They can split him wide. They can get the ball into the hands of Duke Johnson and use the shorter passing game to him almost as their running game. I think they're going to try their best to keep Johnny in the pocket as much as they can. They've got big defensive ends. It's going to be hard for Johnny to see over guys, frankly. So if they can keep him in the pocket, I think that'll be a huge strategy for the Bengals.
Mary Kay, for Johnny Manziel tonight, is this a 1 week thing, or does the kid have a chance to replace Josh McCown here tonight?
Well, we talked to Josh McCown the other day. In addition to him, telling us that he was having a hard time sleeping, breathing. I mean, every single thing that he said leads me to believe that he's got broken or cracked ribs. So I don't think there's going to be any great rush to get him in there. He said the injury that he has is going to take more than a few days or a few weeks to heal. I think that was a clue to all of us that he might be out for a little while. And if Johnny plays well or well enough, this could be it for Johnny. It could be the Johnny show for the rest of the season.
Yeah, Mary Kay, also the schedule lightens up for the Browns. They've got a week and a half after tonight before a game. Then they have a bye week. So that seems to favor going to Johnny Manziel as well, giving him a little more time to prepare if he shows he can do it tonight.
Yeah, that's true. And again, let's say that he goes out there and, if they lose this game and they lose, the Pittsburgh game, then really the season's over, and you really do kind of need to know what you have in Johnny Manziel. I think Josh McCown has played way better than anybody has expected this year, and if not for this rib injury, I would have favored them starting him for a few more games just to kind of, stay true to the philosophy of playing the best guy who's going to help you win. But if they get to 2-8, I would be all for them, starting Johnny the rest of the season just so they can figure out what they want to do for the future.
Mary Kay, you mentioned your expectations for Johnny tonight against Cincinnati. What is it that this coaching staff wants to see from Johnny taking that next step?
Well, they have to see some of the things that we've been talking about. Can he read a defense? Can he operate from within the pocket? Can he be accurate on the run? Can he do all the things that you need to do, within the structure and the framework of the pocket? Because you can't just be running around all the time. So they have to see that he really has made strides in that regard, especially when, again, you're talking about some taller guys in front of you. Is he going to be getting the ball swatted down all the time? Those kind of things. But just the growth that they think they've seen in practice, now they have to see, is it happening on the field?
Mary Kay, let's talk about that Ray Farmer press conference for a minute. It was a bizarre press conference between the sweating and some of his answers. Did we learn anything at all from that press conference?
No, I don't think that, the one takeaway that I got from the press conference with Ray was basically the notion that, I think he's trying to say, look, I'm bringing guys in. They're not playing them. I mean, if I read between the lines of what he was trying to say, that's what I got. How is he going to be, judged? And he might lose his job at the end of this year on guys like Johnny Manziel, Justin Gilbert, and even Dwayne Bowe, who Ray thinks can play some football and they're really not, some of them, in some cases, going to get a chance to play.
Isn't that fair, though? I mean, if he brings in a guy like Johnny Manziel and Dwayne Bowe and Justin Gilbert and those guys don't play, I mean, isn't it fair for him to get fired for that? Isn't that the reason you would fire a GM?
Well, if they're not playing because they are incapable of playing, then yes. But if they're not playing because the coaching staff and the GM and the personnel department aren't seeing eye to eye on player evaluations, then that's a whole different ballgame. What if Johnny can play? Now, we don't know if he can or he can't. But what if he can play and he goes out and demonstrates over these next few games that he can be a starting quarterback in the NFL? All these weeks, maybe things could have been different, maybe not. So the point is that I think Ray's trying to say, how do we know that Dwayne Bowe can't play? He hasn't gotten a chance. How do we know that Johnny can't win games? He hasn't gotten his chance.
On the other side of the equation, Mary Kay, is the defense, which continues to be a story all season long. This was supposed to be the backbone of the team. This was supposed to be a defense that could keep the team in games long enough for Josh McCown to make a play or somebody else to make a play. And it hasn't been that, despite the fact that there are a number of different veterans on that side of the ball. It's not like it's this young defense that's inexperienced. I mean, Ray Farmer brought in a bunch of veterans so that the defense could be the anchor, and it just hasn't happened.
Well, no, and again, when you look on the defensive side of the ball, I think when they headed into this season, I think they really thought that, that maybe Justin Gilbert would actually be able to get on the football field and make some plays this year. So you've got one first-round pick there that hasn't been able to do it. You may have thought that Barkevious Mingo, coming off the shoulder injury that he played with last year and the surgery that he had, that maybe he would come back this year and be able to do some things, and he hasn't been able to do that. Danny Shelton has, he's had his rookie ups and downs. Mm-hmm. He's made progress, and he may turn out to be a Pro Bowl player. He says he will. But this year it's not as though he's been a dominant defensive tackle to this point. In some games he's only playing 30%, 40% of the snaps. So you have some of your first round picks on defense, who just really aren't even able to contribute. And those guys should all be headed towards the Pro Bowl by now, by where they were picked.
Mary Kay, how close did the Browns come to trading Joe Thomas?
I think they came pretty close to trading Joe Thomas. What it came down to was the difference between not wanting to give up the third-round pick and only wanting to give up that fifth along with Joe. And you know what? To be honest with you, I wonder if you look down the road, if they're not going to be regretting that. They could have had what might shape up to be a pretty nice first-round pick in 2017, depending on what happens with Peyton Manning. If he retires and then they struggle for a little while without him, then that could have been a nice pick for the Browns at a time when, they could be needing another quarterback. So they may look at this one. This is one we're going to be keeping an eye on for the next few years.
All right, Mary Kay Cabot, our Browns beat reporter. Thanks for the time, Mary Kay.
Thank you, guys.
Chris, it speaks volumes that, here the Browns are. They're essentially rebuilding again. Yeah. Whether they traded Joe Thomas or not, they've got to rebuild this whole thing.
Right. They're in a situation where it seems like they feel like it's time for them to acquire assets. And General Manager David Griffin for the Cavs calls it asset acquisition mode, and then switching into another different kind of mode. And I thought the Browns were at a position, Dan, where it seemed like they were trying to get players like Joe Thomas or as good as Joe Thomas. And they've had numerous opportunities to get those kinds of guys, and they haven't been able to get those kinds of guys. And I know that the draft is a crapshoot, but that's another reason why it's so perplexing that you want to trade a future Hall of Famer, the best player, not just on your team, but one of the best players in the NFL, just to get more draft picks. You've had so many recently. It doesn't seem like that's what you need. You need guys like Joe Thomas, it seems.
All right, let's switch gears and get to a team that is not in asset acquisition mode, a team that is all in, as they like to say. We bring in part of our Cavaliers reporting team, Joe Vardon. Joe, how are you?
Hey, Dan. I'm doing fine.
All right, Joe. One asset that the Cavaliers, at least LeBron James, is trying to get rid of are those sleeves. It's always something with LeBron James, and he ripped off those sleeves last night. They've caused him problems in the past, at least mentally. As that was all going down, what was going through your head?
Well, I mean, what was going through my head is, oh boy, because, like you said, he so publicly ripped these jerseys in 2014, and it is up to the team, not the league, whether or not they wear them. So it was just, at the time, it was beyond me that he would, or that the Cavs would knowingly put him, in a jersey like that for a couple reasons. One, he doesn't like them, and he doesn't shoot well in them. And two, he is such a lightning rod for attention that you're almost asking for something to happen like last night. I mean, if they had lost that game, you're looking at you're looking at some really interesting debate. Now, LeBron came back and totally diffused all of that by saying to everybody that it was mental and that the jerseys are fine and it's on him, and he likes them. And he told me afterwards that he, not only did he sign off on them, he practiced it. So, as it turned out, it's just kind of one of the quirks of LeBron. But boy, at the time, I told him last night that he broke the internet, and that was certainly, a timeline filler.
Joe, is the Kevin Love, LeBron James honeymoon over after 5 games?
Yeah, our mutual friend Chris Hoynes and I were talking about this morning, and it reminded me of how I felt when I was watching the 2001 World Series, and Piazza hits that foul ball, and the head of the bat comes at Clemens, and he picks it up and just throws it at Piazza. And the first thought running through my head is Roger just had an out-of-body experience. He couldn't have realized what he just did there. And I kind of felt that way about LeBron. I mean, he saw Kevin at his feet, like he probably felt, I think he felt him, and he looked down right at him and then kept walking. I don't know what to say about that other than, I think it's worth mentioning that it happened, and that it was weird, and then, you just consider all the nice things that LeBron has said about Kevin all season.
Staying on the Kevin Love thing, Joe, obviously he's played very well in Kyrie Irving's absence. Eventually, though, Kyrie Irving is going to be back on this basketball team. He's going to be the number 2 guy in this offense. What does that do to Kevin Love?
Well, let's see about that. Let's see whose numbers are what. I think you're probably right, Dan. But, there's a way to even this out a little bit more and continue to get Kevin involved. One thing that was interesting, though, when I was putting together the little piece on LeBron stepping over the focal point, is that while LeBron is looking for Kevin a lot, actually over the last couple of games it started to go down. He's looking for Kevin less than he did over the past couple games, and it's interesting. It's probably just a coincidence, but Kevin's numbers aren't quite as good as they have been over the past couple games. So, Kevin may be the focal point, but I really think that's more of just a psychological play on LeBron's part. If you look at who's taking the most shots, who's scoring the most points, it's still LeBron. The more I think about it, I tend to agree with you, Dan, that Kyrie will probably slide in there. But there is a way that they can continue to move the ball and stay out of the ISO stuff to keep Kevin kind of like 2A, maybe.
Joe, how do you explain LeBron James' shooting struggles that we've seen here at the beginning of the season?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I think it's a little more than he's just not in a rhythm, unless he found his rhythm over the summer and we didn't see it because he didn't shoot well from the outside in the postseason. Now, he was fantastic in the postseason, putting up numbers. He was awesome, and so I feel like he's playing really well right now, like really well, and he's going to the hole a lot more. In the early going now than he did last year, which is great. We all know that. But he's not shooting it. He's not shooting it well at all, and it's something that's kind of gone on over time. Now, I can't tell you about a hitch in his stroke or anything like that. I don't know. And as Kyrie reminded you, Chris, we watch the games they play, so
That's right.
I don't know. But it's there, and it's longer than just these 5 games. I'm going to spend some time this afternoon re-looking at the numbers from last postseason. So I don't have them off the top of my head, but I know they're not good.
Joe, obviously, look, the Cavaliers, these players are human, and they might not say it, but when they play teams like Philadelphia, when they play teams like the Knicks, there might just be a little bit of complacency there, especially early in games as we've seen. How do they fight that as the season goes along?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Warriors, and everyone's doing backflips over their start, but they've played the Rockets, they've played the Pelicans, who aren't doing well, but they have Anthony Davis and had high hopes, and they beat the Clippers last night, and so those are really big games right out of the gate, and the Cavs had a couple to start, but when you get into this mode of playing teams in the East, I think LeBron said it best. They were surprised that the Knicks run sets now, and that kind of caught him off guard. And so, Philadelphia comes in here tomorrow night, and I expect the Cavs to be much sharper against them. And then next week on Friday night, the Cavs will be at the Garden, and I expect a similar heightened focus. Because you're right. I mean, both of those teams built a reputation as just games you can cross off without putting much effort into it, and they both, went at them pretty good.
All right, Joe Vardon. Thanks for the time, Joe.
Okay, guys. Thanks for having me.
So the Cavaliers off to a very good start so far. I mean, what have you thought of the start to their season so far?
Very good. I think what they're showing is that they can win games in a variety of ways. And I think that's what you have to show if you want to be a great team or an elite team. Last night, the Cavs played probably their worst game of the year, and they still won by 10 against New York. They found a way. They turned up the defense. They got to the free throw line as opposed to stagnant offense in the first half, and those are the kinds of things that you're going to have to do throughout an 82-game season. You're not always going to be at your best. Just find a way.
Yeah, and that's one of the ways this team was built. Play a bunch of different ways, a bunch of different lineups, and so far we've gotten to kind of see some of that, even without Kyrie Irving. All right, let's talk a little baseball. We'll bring in our Indians beat reporter, Paul Hoynes. Hoynesy, how are you?
Good, Dan. How you doing?
Doing well. Hoynesy, the Royals are world champions after falling short last season. They got back. They won the World Series. Are they the early favorites to do it again next year?
Well, I guess they've got to be among the favorites. They're going to lose some people free agent wise. They've lost. Well, I don't know. They've had a bunch of guys declare free agency. I don't know if they'll get them all back, but Alex Gordon, Rios is gone. Johnny Cueto, Chris Young, and Jeremy Guthrie. So that's a pretty big chunk out of that championship team. So. It's still a very, very good club, especially position player-wise, but you wonder how they're going to put that rotation back together.
Wasn't that the question, though, when it came to the Royals coming into the year, Hoynesy? Wasn't it about that starting rotation? Like, oh, my goodness, they lose James Shields, they lose this guy, they have to replace him with this guy. And yet, even in the regular season, when the starting pitching struggled, the Royals had one of the best records in all of baseball, and then they get into the postseason, and even though they didn't have a guy like Jacob deGrom and Syndergaard and Matt Harvey, it didn't seem to matter all that much.
Yeah, that's right. They can play that 5-inning game, maybe 6-inning game because their bullpen is so strong. Even, when they lose Greg Holland, their closer at the end of the year, Wade Davis just stepped in and, didn't miss a beat on that. So, that's one of the ways, that's one of the ways they kind of protected that rotation from getting, overexposed. And the other is just their offense. It's just, it's just a great, I think they were like maybe 13th, 14th, right at the bottom of the American League rankings in home runs, but, they still scored a bunch of runs. They led the league, I think, in batting average. And they just, every manager I've ever covered has talked about, we've got to have a lineup that goes 1 through 9, and the Royals are that lineup.
The Indians, of course, don't really have a lineup right now that goes 1 through 9. They declined the option on Ryan Rayburn as well, one of their players who they used him in a platoon a little bit. He was a little up and down with the team, some good, some bad. Are you surprised that they decided not to bring him back next year, or could they still bring him back?
I guess they could still bring him back, but I doubt that, Dan. Usually when these guys, let a guy go, they let him go. And I think it's kind of a mutual agreement. I think, Rayburn is going to be an attractive guy. I think he's going to be a lot like David Murphy, how he could fit into a contending club, just doing what he did last year or this past season, hitting lefties, coming off the bench. He's one of those rare guys that can sit 5, 6, 7 games and come off the bench and swing the bat and swing it with authority. So, I don't think he'll have any trouble getting a job. And, I can see it from the Indians' point of view. He's 34. He'll play next year, probably around, he'll play at 35 next year. And they've got some younger guys. They've got Chris Johnson isn't exactly a young guy, but they've got to pay him. He's on the roster. He's got a 2-year deal for a lot of money. So I would think they want to play him. He hits lefties. Jerry Sands is still an option. He could platoon in right field, and he swings the bat well against lefties. So they've got some coverage there. But not in Johnson's instance, but with Sands at less dollars.
Hoynes, as the World Series was going on, there was so much conversation about Royals general manager Dayton Moore. Obviously, he was the guy that pulled off the Greinke trade that brought Alcides Escobar and Lorenzo Cain. He was the guy that drafted Mike Moustakas, the guy responsible for Eric Hosmer. He was willing to trade a prospect in Will Myers to get James Shields and Wade Davis. And then, of course, he went for it at the trade deadline with Johnny Cueto and Ben Zobrist. When we think about the Indians, obviously Chris Antonetti is going to be responsible for acquiring the talent, but who is Mike Chernoff, and what kind of role is he going to have in this organization moving forward?
Well, as you know, he just got promoted to general manager. Mm-hmm. That's kind of like a paper move, I think. Antonetti's still going to have the last call on all baseball decisions. But Chernoff is he's a lot like any kind of assistant GM or GM. I think he does a lot of behind the scenes stuff. He does a lot of work with contracts, with talking to agents. He makes deals. I think him and Antonetti work well together. But he has the authority to make a deal. I think obviously Antonetti has the final say. But it's like any partnership. I think they both are kind of up to it in their elbows. And what one guy, if a deal is made, I think it has the fingerprints of both of them on it.
Hoynes, when you look ahead to 2016 and this current Indians roster, who do you think is the most important player?
The most important player on this roster, I've got to think it's probably Corey Kluber. Second in innings pitched, third in strikeouts, third in WHIP last year, even though he lost 16 games. Can he turn it? Can he? I don't know if you have to turn it around, but can he be more fortunate and win? At least get back to 500, at least get back to a winning record? Because if you look at it, if he pitches anywhere close to his Cy Young form, the Indians have probably reached the postseason because Carrasco and Salazar each won 14 games, and they had great late season contributions from Tomlin and Anderson. And if Kluber was more fortunate, and he obviously run support hurt him, if he could have won 15 games, who knows what difference that would have made.
All right, Paul Hoynes, our Indians beat reporter. I'm sure we'll talk to you a number of times over this offseason, Hoynesy. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, guys.
All right, let's send it over now to Bud Shaw, who, as of right now, has not ripped the sleeves off of his coat. That could change.
Well, thank you, guys. Former NFL quarterback Rich Gannon shared some thoughts with cleveland.com this week on the progress of Johnny Manziel. He suggested, among other things, that one Thursday night game won't tell us much about the future of the Browns' second-year quarterback. Sounds reasonable. Manziel, after all, had a promising start against Tennessee, and what it told Mike Pettin was to return him to the bench as quickly as possible. He had great start in his mop-up duty in Buffalo last year, and when he made his season debut, running for a touchdown and making a couple impressive throws, and that game ended with him on his back in the end zone, counting clouds. We all know Cincinnati came to Cleveland last December and made him look like a high school quarterback. And that said, he has played with more poise this season. I know, how could he not play with more poise? But it's pretty obvious what conclusions we will draw if he looks overmatched again. But what if he plays well? What if he plays well and the Browns win? It's a crazy thought, I realize that. Well, here's what Gannon said. Quote, Johnny has to play at a high level and do it on a consistent basis. No one's going to say if he goes out Thursday night and throws for 3 touchdowns and 300 yards that this guy has arrived. That would be foolish, but you want to see gradual, steady improvement. No one will say that? No one? Well, our first commenter says, what does Gannon know anyway? I'd start with saying that he's played the toughest position in sports for about 18 years and once did it well enough to go to 4 Pro Bowls. He also knows, and we should too, what happened to RG3 in Washington and Colin Kaepernick in San Francisco. Remember when those two revolutionized the quarterback position? And defenses were never the same again? No, me neither. Manziel doesn't have a blank slate. He has to be good for a long period to erase a disastrous rookie season and to change the conversation about his lack of size. He has to make the pocket his home and show he can overcome the instinct to flee it too soon. Gannon is right, and it seems the arguments on behalf of Manziel are decreasing until he shows us something. A year ago, the vibe in this town for a Manziel primetime start would have been off the charts. Now, a commenter wonders if Austin Davis's debut is imminent and asks if Manziel will even make it through the game. Comes the answer, I hope so. We need to see for sure if he does or doesn't have what it takes. I'm not sure if that commenter meant Austin Davis or Johnny Manziel, but let's just agree that that's not how this works. There's not much Manziel can do in one game or even in a handful of games to convince me and the Browns, hopefully, to stay away from a top-rated quarterback in the next draft if they're in position to take one. Short of channeling LeBron, which Manziel could always do. Our final comment sees Manziel ripping off his shirt sleeves against the Bengals in what he calls a, quote, terse moment, end quote. I think he means a tense moment. I also assume he means if the Bengals don't tear those sleeves off first. Guys?
Is that comment on Ray Farmer, who also made up some words to
I was going to bring a towel for this particular segment.
I want to
Got to make sure that you take off the glasses too before you wipe your brow.
Woo! Hot seat? No way.
Let's go back to something Mary Kay Cabot said, by the way, that's a little bit concerning. She thinks maybe the Bengals defensive linemen are too big for Johnny to see over.
Well, darn it, that should be against the rules. There ought to be a law against that.
Can we go back to Ray Farmer Towelgate? I love that we just attach gate to everything in sports nowadays. It makes no sense whatsoever, but we do it. The lights are bright. We all sit in a studio where there are bright lights and they're hot too, right?
Yes.
But you absolutely, under no circumstances, if you're the general manager, can you ask for, grab a towel, take your glasses off, and wipe your face. It's a horrible look for a fan base that is so angry with you to begin with.
Yes.
You just gave everybody more ammunition.
It's the, remember the Republican response to the State of the Union when Marco Rubio, I think it was, had to go down and get the water?
Yes.
Looked very comfortable. By the way, this just in, I always wanted to say that.
Oh, yeah.
I've always wanted to say two things. This just in and friend of the show.
Okay.
Well, we got one.
All right,
We're
so this
halfway
just
there.
in. The Lions have blown out their GM and team president. The Lions have been more successful than this organization over the last couple seasons.
Yeah.
Not suggesting that's what Haslam should do, but anybody who thinks that a guy as impatient as him is sitting there saying, I said I wasn't going to blow it up, so I'm not going to blow it up. If he saw that press conference the other day, he might be thinking differently.
Yeah. You know what? It really sounded like Ray Farmer was trying to move some of that blame a little bit over to Mike Pettin. 8 more weeks of this, guys. 8 more weeks of Cleveland Browns football. All right, that'll do it for our show. Thanks to Mary Kay Cabot, Joe Vardon, and Paul Hoynes, of course, for Bud Shaw and Chris Fedor. I'm Dan Labbe. Thanks for watching.